Welcome to this explainer. Today we're cracking open a really fantastic, incredibly practical resource, Fred Clements' book, 30 Coaching Tools and Approaches That Actually Work. We're going to zero in on chapter 24, which covers a framework that can fundamentally change the way you lead, coach, and manage. It's called Transactional Analysis. If you're a coach, a manager, a leader, or really anyone in a people development role, you know that the quality of your conversations matters more than almost anything else. So let's jump right into a working toolkit for real conversations with real people. Okay, let's kick things off with a question I'm sure we've all wrestled with at some point. Why do some workplace conversations just get completely stuck? Seriously, think about those moments. You try to give some constructive feedback, and suddenly the other person gets incredibly defensive, or they just shut down entirely. Or maybe you're dealing with a lack of confidence, poor ownership, or just a general sense of low trust on the team. You're genuinely trying to help someone move forward, but you just end up going in these frustrating, repetitive circles. Well, what you're usually witnessing in those tough moments is a total breakdown in the dynamic. It's the stark contrast between adult-to-adult collaboration, where colleagues act as equals, share facts, and take responsibility, and a parent-to-child conflict, where people suddenly slip into unhelpful, reactive communication patterns. One person starts dictating the rules, and the other starts rebelling or passively seeking permission. It's wild, but once you learn to spot this pattern, you literally can't unsee it. So, to fix these interactions, here's what we'll cover today. 1. The workplace trap. 2. Defining the tool. 3. The 3 ego states. 4. Practical application. 5. Guardrails. And finally 6. Real change. Let's start right off with part 1, the workplace trap. Fred Clements points out a really fascinating dynamic in his book. You see, often organizations accidentally behave in a very parent-to-child way when the environment becomes highly legalistic, completely process-heavy, or overly controlling. Staff actually start feeling like they're being treated like children rather than adults. And what happens next? Well, you start seeing symptoms like compliance without ownership, active resistance, heavy dependency, or just quiet resentment. Staff might just sit back and wait to be told exactly what to do, constantly seeking permission. And the managers, they end up constantly setting boundaries or trying to micromanage outcomes, basically acting like exhausted parents. Which brings us to part 2. Defining the tool. The tool we're using to break this cycle is Transactional Analysis, commonly shortened to TA. It was originally developed by Eric Berne. Now, I know that sounds a bit like heavy clinical psychology, but I promise you it really isn't. It is just an immensely practical lens to help you see what is actually happening in the room. As Fred Clements notes, you're not trying to psychoanalyze every single sentence someone says. It's just about gaining awareness. It helps you notice the patterns playing out right in front of you, so you can actually choose a different, better response. Alright, part 3, the 3 ego states. So according to TA, we all have 3 states operating within us: parent, adult, and child. Communication is basically just a transaction between these ego states. When a conversation is going smoothly, the lines of communication are parallel, like an adult talking to another adult. But notice what happens when the wires cross. Let's say you ask a perfectly logical question from your adult state, like, "Hey, what are the deadlines on this project?" But your colleague replies from a defensive child state, "Why are you always checking up on me?" Bam, that's exactly where the friction happens. Let's quickly define these 3 states. The parent state thinks, feels, and behaves exactly as we were taught by authority figures. So it can be critical and controlling, or it can be nurturing and supportive. The child state contains feelings and behaviors replayed from our early life, meaning it can be naturally creative and fun, but it can also be anxious or rebellious. But the adult state, the adult thinks and behaves in a calm, rational way, totally based on the here and now. While the nurturing parent and the free child absolutely have their wonderful uses, your primary goal as a manager or coach dealing with complex issues is to maintain that adult-to-adult interaction. That is where real problem-solving lives. Moving on to part 4, practical application. So how do we use this? TA is fundamentally a diagnostic tool. Your internal checklist as a manager or coach really just has 3 steps. Step 1, listen for the ego states. Is the person you're speaking with coming from an adult place, or have they slipped into a defensive child state? Step 2, check your own state. Have you accidentally been hooked into acting like a critical parent? And step 3, shift the dynamic. Your goal is always to guide the conversation back to adult. You don't do this by acting like a cold robot. You do it by responding with thoughtful awareness rather than just reacting emotionally. So here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. If you're a manager who is feeling powerless or just frustrated by organizational pressure, you might accidentally slip into a child state yourself, or you might overcompensate and become a rigid parent. So before your next difficult conversation, just pause and ask yourself, what state am I leading from, and what state am I inviting from others? Simply asking that question can instantly elevate the quality of your leadership. Let's look at a quick practical example of how TA applies to our own internal dialogue. Because it's not just about how we talk to others. Have you ever heard a really harsh voice in your head saying something like, "You should have done better"? You absolutely must not get this wrong. That right there is your inner critical parent talking. And a lot of the time it triggers your inner scared child to respond with, "I can't do this, I'm scared, I know I'm going to fail," and this internal loop completely paralyzes a person's performance and confidence. As a coach, your job is to help the person flex and strengthen their internal adult state so they can break that nasty loop. You teach the adult to intervene by asking grounded, logical questions. Things like, okay, what are the actual facts here? What hard evidence do I really have that I'm going to fail? What specific support do I need to take just one step forward? This balanced, rational approach quiets down that harsh parent and totally soothes the panicked child. Next up, part 5, guardrails. Now, Fred Clements is super clear about when not to use TA. You never want to use it to label or shame someone. Like, please don't patronize a colleague by saying, "Hey, you're being a child right now." That is literally just going to cross the transaction even further. Don't use it as a weapon in an argument, and definitely don't try to psychoanalyze every single casual chat you have. But most importantly, using TA in a coaching or management setting is absolutely not a substitute for clinical support. If you're dealing with deep trauma or serious psychological distress, refer that person to a qualified therapeutic professional. Keep this tool focused firmly on workplace communication and behavior. Finally, part 6, real change. We started this whole thing by asking why conversations get stuck. Well, they get stuck because we blindly react based on old ingrained patterns. But as Fred Clements writes, once people can see the pattern, they have more choice. When you finally understand whether you're operating as a parent, an adult, or a child, you suddenly unlock the power to steer the interaction. You can transform stuck, highly defensive arguments into clear, respectful, and genuinely impactful adult-to-adult collaborations. And honestly, that is the true game-changing power of transactional analysis in the workplace. So remember, awareness gives you choice, and choice gives you the ability to lead effectively. Next time you feel a conversation slipping entirely out of your control, just ask yourself which version of you just walked into the room. For more information, head over to clementsconsultancy.com to buy a discounted PDF copy of the book, or head over to Amazon for the ebook or printed version.